Good afternoon, everybody. So I think we'll just start this session by briefly going round, and each of us will introduce ourselves to get things started. So I'm Simon Stewart. I'm the founder and creative director of Charles Burnand, and we are a specialist lighting and furniture design company, and we fabricate all of our pieces here in the UK, but we work predominantly with Murano glass. So I find myself in a very unique position because I'm the only one who is manufacturing, and these gorgeous people in front of you, they're the people who buy. They're the people who have to think about how they're going to make lighting work in schemes. So we'll start with Siobhan. Siobhan can do her intro.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. So I'm Siobhan Kelly. I joined David Collins Studio last year to head up the residential team. David Collins Studio, we're interior designers. We deal mainly in the luxury industry across both commercial, retail, hospitality, and all the way through to residential.
Hello, my name is Rod Moreno-Macy Architects. We work in hospitality with fast casual brands. We also work in high-end residential. And we're also trying to move ourselves into what I'm loosely defining as sustainable luxury. So we'll see how that all goes. And that's it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Wolf. I founded my studio just over 10 years ago. It's called Design by Wolf, and we specialize in residential interiors.
Hi, my name's Simone. I run Studio Sus. We're an interior design company. We work across commercial and residential. We have a focus on incorporating art into people's homes. And we are also quite involved in increasing sustainability into our designs as well.
Very good, thank you very much. So I find myself in a very luxurious position of working between here and the US. In the US, there's a huge emphasis placed on lighting, how they choose their lighting, when they buy their lighting, both in terms of the scheme and who they work with. So I'm very curious to know from each of our panelists today, at what point do you start thinking about your lighting scheme, about the design, and how much emphasis are you placing on that and the budget that you set aside for that?
So lighting design is really important for us. It's integral to our schemes. We would normally start the conversation as early as we possibly can. We look at we start thinking about the concept, how the space is going to be used, what kind of atmosphere we might like to create, what kind of special finishes, textures, what things we might like to actually light. And then we would start speaking to a consultant, and we'd work alongside them all the way through to final dressing, artwork, positioning, and this lighting commissioning. And then in terms of budget, we had a quick chat about this earlier. Yeah, I think really it depends on the project and how we might, and the client's priorities as to how we would apportion the actual budget. Often for things like statement pieces, we might look at that as something separate, a separate budget for sort of special art pieces.
I mean, it's quite interesting just to pick up on some of the points, because when you actually look at the work of David Collins Studio, which you've seen going through on the slides, there's a huge emphasis placed on, quite substantial statement pieces. So with regards to that, the budget that you would set aside, what kind of proportion do you think it is? Do you have a percentage that you will say to the client, this is how much we are going to put aside for that, or is it fairly free-flowing?
For us, it's not necessarily free-flowing, but it really depends on their priorities. It tends to be quite high if it's a statement piece, but really we'd work through the layout to start with and understand the flow, how it's going to be used, how the space is going to be used. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, I'm afraid.
Not at all. I mean, we're looking at, Rod's work here that's currently up, and you can see that there's a lot of architectural lighting, but, we have some statement pieces as well. So, where do you start with this?
Well, I suppose you're right to say that our approach starts as an architectural approach, typically around getting the spaces to work right, getting the spaces to flow together and to connect. And lighting is a huge part of that, but I think I'd be lying if I said that it's the first thing that we go to when we think about a project. I mean, I think it's always about occupation, and that to me is when people don't start early enough in the process to develop a lighting scheme, is to really think deep down about how a space is actually going to be used in real life, not on the drawing board or on the computer, but actually in real life.
You're a multidisciplinary studio, aren't you? So it's architecture and design. So all of that is in-house and it's being thought of from the outset.
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, we tend to collaborate with interiors teams on houses. You're taking a client through that conversation about how they will use a space, and then therefore how they will appreciate a space, and then therefore how it must be lit. And it's a balance between what's lighting the architecture, and then the lighting as the architecture or as the interior itself. You sort of have to balance the two between each other.
Brian.
Lighting would be discussed very early on in our initial briefs with the clients. We would obviously identify how the clients plan to use each of the spaces, but we would go a little further and ask how they imagine themselves controlling it. Is it a fully integrated system? Are they wanting to incorporate their blinds, their audiovisuals? So we know what kind of control systems we need to incorporate into our designs and into our concepts, and what needs to be built in and incorporated into our joinery schemes. Based on that, we can give a fuller brief to the lighting designers we would work with on the project.
Simone.
We think about lighting really early as well. We're lucky at the moment to be working on a couple of new builds, and literally the planning permission hasn't even been granted on one of them, but we're already talking about the lighting schemes, because we're talking about what the client wants to light. If there's a void, whether you make that void, give it some sort of amazing statement light within the void or not. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, as early as we get involved, we're talking about lighting.
I mean, it's very clear to see from each of the designers here and the work that they do that they're probably in a very luxurious position to be working with lighting designers, which is, that's something else in itself. And not everybody here today, is in that fortunate position. So when you start working with a lighting designer, if it's somebody's first time and they don't know how to go about this, what do they do? I mean, I know what they do, but I'm very interested to know what you would say.
I think for us it's being clear before you start that conversation with what you want to achieve. So, again, are there any special requirements, with controls or specific tasks that need to take place in the building or the space? What's the atmosphere that you want to create, and actually really understanding the sort of the layering. I mean, we do a lot of work that's very layered, the layering of the textures, the finishes. And then you can have that can form the basis for really a meaningful dialogue with a lighting consultant. That's the first for us.
Very good.
So our approach tends to be about dividing a building or a space into a series of moments. So a series of moments of inhabitation, if you like, of living, where they might sleep, or they might eat, or they might read a book, and you use those kind of moments of real life to then start to dictate how you might control how you light it, whether that's something about lighting a task, or whether it's about lighting a texture that then is a backdrop to that task. So I would always advocate starting with the use of the space, with how the space will be lived in, as the starting point to any good lighting scheme.
I think most of our residential schemes, or any of our projects that we're working on now, would have a lighting specialist involved from an early stage. We've had varied results from it, and what I've learned is they can only give you a good end result if you give them a detailed enough brief at the start. So make sure you can convey the concept that you're working on at an early stage. They can identify if there are going to be obstacles with the materials you're working with or the suppliers you're working with. Make sure you can, a lot of the time our clients won't want to meet with the lighting designer. They want one point of contact. So it's up to you to get across their vision for how they're going to use the space and how they're going to control the scenes and the settings.
So essentially it comes down to giving a very, very clear brief. So in the way that you would work from your client, the information that you need to get from the client, you're going to be passing that on. Okay.
Yeah, we often don't work with lighting specialists, actually. We will... Well, no, in terms of we are, as the interior designer, we are advising the client on lighting, and then we advise the electrician, and we'll discuss those things with them. So, it really comes down to how that space is going to be used. If it's somewhere, say it's a kitchen, for example, or a study, you need to have really good task lighting, and that's fundamental. So, those are the considerations. Then there's also all the how do you want to feel, the ambient considerations as well. But it really comes down to the brief and understanding how everyone wants to feel at every moment, and the things that need to happen in every space. And then we'll build on that scheme with the client and with the electricians and the contractors team, and work things out that way.
Yeah, it's a very bespoke process that you go through, which segues very nicely onto bespoke lighting. So I'm sure that each of you have commissioned pieces at a certain point in time. What's your individual process for going through that? Because there are so many pitfalls when you commission lighting. There are lots of questions that need to be asked very early on. They're all going to say they do all of these things, by the way. You need to ask the question, what's the purpose of this lighting? Is it task lighting? Is it, I don't know, are we trying to create an atmosphere? Is it the primary source of lighting? There's nothing worse than making something that's quite beautiful. They're installed, the client loves them, but the light fixture doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. Give me a couple of examples, if you can, of where you've commissioned a piece and how you went about it, what the brief was. Hopefully there'll be something as we go through the slides.
So a lot of our projects are subject to quite strict NDAs being that level. So unfortunately I can't...
Which is why we don't have some of the projects that we've worked on with David Collins' studio on the slides. Yeah,
exactly. So unfortunately I can't give you specific examples, but what I could maybe give you a bit of insight to our approach to bespoke lighting. I think particularly when we're looking at statement pieces where David Collins' studio particularly, we're looking at sort of context and how we might achieve a sense of place. So the statement piece often is a sort of anchor for the flow, for the kind of feel of the interior. So where was I going with this? I can't remember now. Sorry. So the process, I suppose, is we're looking at the materiality. We're looking at the kind of specific finishes that we might look to, I suppose, layer up. How you might experience it, how you might use it, if it's something specific to the user.
Yeah, of course.
So, interestingly, we don't tend to work with bespoke lighting commissions as with a lighting manufacturer specifically. We do tend to work on hospitality work with artists and makers, and I think actually one of the key things to that process is to make sure that you're working with the right person, and with the right person for the right piece, so that you don't end up in a position where you're battling against the maker, the artist, the designer, in order to achieve something that their style, that their approach simply won't do. So I think that initial collaboration, that initial connection with the artist is critical, and then from that, the result will always be what you hoped it would be, and you need to give artists the freedom to do their thing. That's why you have them on board. Otherwise, draw it and get it made.
Of course.
Just to add to that as well, actually, because we also do a lot of work with craftsmen and artists. There's a story that relates to their work that kind of underpins the piece, and that can be a really great talking point for a client in their home, or so that's another way that we would just look into.
I'd say with commissions in general, not just lighting, whether it's furniture, art, rugs, whatever you're commissioning, you need to have the clients on board, and they need to be aware that this is a commission for them. They need to be involved. They're going to have to love the piece. They're going to pay a higher than average price for the piece that you're commissioning, and rely heavily on the expertise. So if you're going to a specific company to produce the piece for you, take advice from them. They're the people who make it for a living. We can give them the concepts. We can indicate what we want to achieve at the piece in a particular space, but take the advice that they give you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think working with any artist, whether it's a lighting manufacturer as well. You have to take, you're going to that company because of the style of the lights that they create. It can be quite difficult sometimes when if you're working with. We had a situation once where we were working with a shoe designer. She had very, very strict rules about her flamingos, and we were working with a lighting designer, and literally designing 12 Murano glass flamingos for this light in this store, and then it kept going backwards and forwards. But the piece was amazing in the end, but unfortunately, because the craft was so intense, it wasn't there for the store opening, and then it didn't actually make it into the store that it was supposed to be at. So when you're working with artists and creatives and designers, it's about managing that process as well, which can be quite difficult sometimes, because sometimes clients will think, well, if I'm making this change, why do I then have to wait however many weeks? So it's understanding that everyone has their craft, and lighting designers are really quite amazing, but blowing glass can be quite difficult as well, and it's about appreciating that everyone who's involved in the process has their craft and brings their brilliance to it, so that in the end, hopefully, you get these fabulous products.
I was just going to add that as well. I think there's also that there's a wonderful dialogue in creating something with an artist. It's that collaboration where you're both sort of taking each other a little bit out of your comfort zone. But I completely agree with you. It's having the respect for the craft and the time that takes, and being able to allocate enough into your overall program and communicate to your client, and sort of almost not necessarily educate your client, but have them understand the benefit of allocating that time, investing that time in the piece.
Yeah, totally.
You can't start that process early enough. I mean, the impact of a feature piece arriving on site from an architectural point of view can be enormous. You've finished the hallway, the staircase, the roof light. We had one where the whole roof light had to come back off the stairwell in order to lower this chandelier back through the roof of a Georgian listed townhouse. Those are the kind of things you want to think about early.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's one of the projects that is on the Charles Bonan slide here, and it was a project that we worked on with David Collins Studio, and the entire process probably lasted 18, 19 months. It was a very detailed. The sconces that you see are quite extraordinary. The design is so simple but beautiful in its simplicity, but the engineering that had to go into it, the dialogue, the sampling, it was quite extraordinary. So yeah, I would say absolutely you need to allow time, if you're going to go down that bespoke route, for sure. Thank you. So at the moment, there would appear to be, when you look at Instagram, it's all about architectural lighting now. It's the sconces are disappearing, the chandeliers are disappearing, and we're seeing a huge trend. It's always been there, but a huge trend now for people to be lighting the building. So, the architectural features. Why do we think this is? Is it because people have had enough of sconces, because they're seeing too many derivatives, and interiors are starting to, one could say, potentially they're becoming a little bland? Why are people starting to do this more in the commercial sense?
I think we've always lit the architecture and celebrated the architecture as part of the interior, because you can, so much of it can be a sort of secondary light source. Your ceiling can bring a huge amount of light into a space and really elevate that sense of expansiveness. But I think there has been a movement towards comfort, towards sort of less is more reduction of stuff, and where the statement light piece has been often a kind of statement of, I suppose, yourself as as a homeowner. This is you're putting yourself into this unique piece. I think more there's a trend towards the sort of comfort and the sort of tranquility of spaces. Maybe been an influence towards that.
I mean, it's extraordinary when you. Oh, that's the sconce that I was talking about. When you go into any of the David Collins restaurants, bars. I think of the Connaught bar at the Connaught Hotel. The lighting in that space is extraordinary. It takes you to a very special and a very, very sexy place. And it's the very subtle use of lighting that you see from the sconces, but also because of the way that the actual the architectural features have been lit.
Yeah, and I think, mentioning the Connaught, there are a lot of different levels of reflectivity. You've got kind of gilding, but you've also got high lacquer.
The Pierre Bonfils work.
Yeah, exactly. And making the most of that sort of adds to the sort of layering. I mean, everything that we do is very layered. So to focus everything on a single piece and not celebrate the architecture, if you like, or the kind of interior finishes would be a bit of a shame.
I think sometimes it's potentially this overload of imagery that makes the special and unique so widely available, at least in digital form.
Everything's accessible now.
That means that nothing is unique from the moment it's first photographed or published. And I think let's speak for myself. We try and take clients on a journey that makes them be braver about the spaces they create, to actually put a personal touch or to inject some sort of their own story into a space. And all of that requires a commitment to decorative fixtures. But the fallback position is always that a reductionist scheme will provide you with flexibility or with multi-purpose or with all of those things that actually dilute the experience. So I think we should be pushing more towards decorative lighting. And decorative lighting that's intelligent in that it can do the architecture but also be an object in itself.
That's very nice to hear.
I think we've probably seen an increase in architectural lighting because the products that are available on the market have become a lot more discreet. If we think back the last 5-10 years, a lot of the products that were available were ugly, large, needed large voids and walls or in detailing to incorporate them, but now you can do a lot more. And it complements the decorative lighting that we use, so we can create layered schemes. We can celebrate the architecture or the quality of designers or architects' work by drawing emphasis or bringing emphasis to the work that we've done without compromising the overall aesthetic with what were pretty ugly fixtures.
None of mine.
I think we're increasing the use of architectural lighting because, as I think has been mentioned, I think it does give that sense of space to any building. So, and if there are features that you can light up, so that, if you're lighting up a room, I'm working on a project at the moment, which is this massive open plan room, and there simply aren't the walls, or, we don't really want lighting coming out of the flooring, for example. So, why not light up where the steel beams are? Because that gives an amazing wash of light, and that means that the light, how they want to feel in that space, will still be enhanced, and you don't necessarily have to see the lighting feature for the lighting to be there. So I think that's, as has been mentioned, the fact that there are better products here. And this takes me very nicely onto one of our projects. So here there was architectural lighting in the coves. So we actually built the coves down. So the branding, this was the Sophia Webster store on Mount Street. So her branding and the cornicing, she's got the flamingos in the plasterwork, but actually there's a lovely cove lighting effect, which provides the store with that lovely atmosphere. So.
I mean, that coffered ceiling is amazing. The flamingos just popping at the top, amazing. Yeah. Very nice.
And I guess in some ways, if you control both parts of the process, both the architecture and the lighting, then you can create decorative fittings from the architecture, like
exactly.
You did, and the flamingos there became part of the fitting.
Exactly.
I mean, talking of architecture, there are so many new builds popping up around London, well, in fact, all over the world. And, we all find ourselves working in these properties. Now, if you're very, very fortunate and your client comes to you before any fit out has been done at all, you have complete free reign as to how you're going to start working with that space, both in terms of architecture, because hopefully you've just got an open space and you can start dividing that up as you wish. But sometimes your client is going to come to you and everything has been predetermined. So the space where the architect or the developer has said this is where the dining table is going to go, and it's of course, completely the wrong place, because you'd never have the dining table in the corner because you want it by the window or wherever. But you have this point in the ceiling. Maybe sconces have been set in a certain position on the wall. What do you do in this situation? You know, if your client doesn't have that budget where they can start to rip out, or you are at the very beginning of that, what's your solution?
So I think it depends a little bit with what you're working with. So if we just assume for a minute that the base build has a kind of relatively sensible grid and the wall lights are at a sensible height, you don't have to make any actual intervention. Then, you know, we would always look to use freestanding fittings as best as possible to create features. So maybe we're positioning, you know, floor lights and table lamps to light up aspects of the walls. And then cable management, trying to hide cables, position them as best as possible, because inevitably the small power won't be quite where you want it to be, so you're going to have extensions and
Never.
things. Yeah.
I mean, I do think some of that perfection, particularly in hospitality spaces, some of that perfection that you try and achieve in a photograph or in a on the computer screen, is not how a space is experienced. And actually, you know, a neatly clipped wire or a discrete fitting or even an expression of that sort of architecture doesn't impact on your experience of it at all. But I do think that one thing you have to do is you have to be brave to change the things that you absolutely have to change. So have have in your mind the idea that you will compromise on the things that don't matter, but be absolutely clear that certain things have to be changed, because you will have to live with those consequences, and the builders will only be there once, and you don't want to start that process again. And it's I suppose, in some ways, significantly more wasteful to change things later.
But if you're working on that project, I'm going to be antagonistic here. You're working on that project. The client doesn't have the budget. You know, they really don't want to start to, you know, chase out the walls. What do you do?
I mean, there are architectural ways to deal with these problems. So, you know, we will have all in our time seen the dangly cable on the ceiling, which you will take a point that's in the wrong position and reposition it over the right place. Or, as Siobhan said, you may use freestanding lights that can run cables to other places. I think you just have to get more clever. You have to get cleverer with how you arrange the lighting to suit the space. As I say, I would never compromise on how you use the space, because that's the thing that will annoy you the most.
Yeah, for the sake of having one chandelier in the wrong place or right place.
Next house.
Exactly. There's always more.
Strong drink is the way I'd start this project. Multiple. Compromise is a really dirty word, and I think you've got to be careful. The client has hired you as the interior designer to give them a space they're going to enjoy living in and using. You're the person that they're going to remember, or the service that they're going to remember, and if it's not right at the end, ultimately it's you and your reputation that's to blame. So if there are elements that I felt were zero compromise for me, I would rather cut back on the budget elsewhere. You know, they can upgrade a sofa, they can upgrade a rug in a few years' time. They're not going to be chasing out walls and putting supports in for chandeliers later. That's something that I would fight for and probably wouldn't compromise on.
That's interesting.
I think compromise, you know, I think as an interior designer, we're always coming up with things that don't quite work out how they're supposed to be, or, you know, even if something on plan might look like it's going to work really well, and then you get to the site and something is, you know, is different, and it's just a matter of coming up with creative solutions. So, say for example, if there is a dining room, if the chandelier for the dining room is in the wrong place, then again it's either chasing a wire somewhere else or lighting it in a different place. But I do think that, you know, the function and the layout of the room shouldn't be dictated by what's going on the ceiling. Sorry.
Yeah, so as a designer, we're constantly having to go into spaces, you know, in an advisory role, where we have a designer saying this isn't possible, a client saying, but I want this here, and it's about being creative. Essentially, that's it. You know, that's
always.
It's where you have to start to earn your money.
Yeah. Well, it's a, you know, it can be. It doesn't have to be expensive to be creative,
No.
but it's just, you know, it's just a matter of there are certain things when it comes to the layout that really it's not worth compromising on, because it will bother you every single day while you're living there or working in that space. And so it's working out what the kind of the decision tree is, and what are the things that you're really not prepared to compromise on, and then working solutions around those.
I think that's also just going back to the decision tree. I think, it really depends as well on the client's priorities, timeline. Is there time to make an architectural intervention? Because actually, there may not be any more. And again, just getting creative with how to best achieve the layout. Ideally, you'd be able to get involved at a point where you can influence all the positions of the downlights and so on. But it's not always the case. No.
We do talk about. We're obviously talking about lighting today, but it is a component of an entire project, which includes structure and budget and timeline and babies and Christmas and all those things that sit within a project. And I think sometimes deciding what's right for a project may not specifically sit with the lighting. It may come out of some other area of the scheme that allows that piece to work or another piece to work.
Yeah, it comes down to priorities at the end of the day. You have a budget available to you, and as a designer, I often see it as being the designer's responsibility to move that budget as to where it needs to go. Because if you have a client who's insistent that they have to have I don't know, a particular settee, and that settee is going to cost 100,000, then if that's 120,000 is their budget, well, then you've only got 20,000 to do everything else. So, that's when the client is saying that has to be in the project. Then you're going to IKEA for everything else. So that's fine. So with regards to commercial spaces and retail, that would be commercial, and residential, do you have a different approach? I mean, I know that DCS do a lot of commercial spaces, but does the studio, I don't know, literally, do you approach those in a different way?
Well, I think they both hold hands with each other, really. Whether we're talking about, maybe we're talking more about hospitality and residential at the moment, in terms of them influencing each other. But the process itself is quite similar. You understand the concept, what you're trying to achieve, what the space needs to achieve for your client, and then you're bringing the lighting in early and having those discussions early.
I suppose the biggest difference that we find is the time you spend in a commercial space is just so much shorter than the time you spend in a residential space as a user. And so you're able, in hospitality spaces in particular, you're able to create more of a theatre, more of a scene set, more of a single experience, a drama that's controlled by the designer, by the operator. Whereas in residential design, you have to be slightly cleverer with how you create that drama, because that drama can become tiresome or annoying or outdated, or all of those things that then make it irksome rather than joyful. So that time difference makes a big impact on how we design things.
I think it's easy to identify with residential projects who you're taking the brief from. It's the end user, it's the person who's going to live in it. With commercial, I think you have to be a little more careful and be sure that you're taking the brief from the person who actually is going to be operating it, managing it, marketing the property, so that you're designing for the purpose that it's going to be used.
I think our approach, it all comes down to the client and what their priorities are. So whether it's in a residential setting, how they read in bed, whether they're using a Kindle or they need bedside lights, to whether, if they're in a retail environment, how do you want to display the stock that you're showing? So again, it just all comes down to taking a real brief and understanding the customer experience or the user experience in the places that we're designing.
I think to add to that, with residential design, I mean, we still very much curate the experience. So I totally take what you're saying about how things can become quite irksome, and maybe that comes down to a conversation about control and how things might be controlled, whether you're using scene settings or whether we're going back to the single switch on the wall and trying to step away from something that's as complex as that. But yeah,
I think briefing is key. You're picking up on your point, because often clients themselves don't really understand how the space is going to work, particularly in dramatic reinventions of a space. So you do have to be careful that that brief is a dialogue, so that you're helping your client develop that brief, so that both you understand it and they understand what the outcome will be. And that's where great projects come from.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of the experience of working with an interior designer, I think, is that interior designer being able to tease out what the brief is, because quite often, clients will turn up and they'll just say, well, I don't really know what I like or what I don't like. And it's a big part of our job is just showing them visuals. What they don't like is as important as what they do like, and it's just that it's that constant dialogue that goes on throughout a project of just teasing out from them what becomes important, in their lighting and every single part of the job.
So does the commercial client have a clearer idea of what they're going into that project with in comparison?
Well, the experience that we've had in retail, yes, they want to sell things, but actually, no. I mean, they also want someone to experience the brand. So it is that it's that brand experience coupled with, what's happening and are they making transactions? And so, yes, I think they are clearer. So
can you take more risks with the commercial projects?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes, yes, because also, someone. I think in the age of Instagram and, wanting to have those how you were saying, you don't necessarily want to live with these really vibrant interiors, but actually if you're going, whether it's retail or hospitality, I think designers are creating things that are more Instagrammable, because that's going to make it more memorable, potentially. If every store looked the same or if every hotel looked the same, that it wouldn't be the experience that I think the commercial owners really want it to be. But as a commercial owner, I think you really want to have your unique and individual experience, and whether it's in a retail store or in a hotel or anywhere, in a bar, nightclub, whatever. But, you really want to make that, you want to make an impact. If they say that everyone is competing for people's attention these days, then I think it's actually quite fun in interior design to try and grab that attention, and hopefully get the good end result that the business owner wants.
That that notion of the Instagrammable moment is actually, it's so key to a lot of commercial work that we do now, and I think, yes, it's a sort of a means of increasing footfall potentially, but it's also establishing a presence just on the wider stage. So, yeah.
I think it does allow you also, with well-established progressive brands, to actually form a partnership between the designers and the brand to actually develop the direction the brand will take. So it doesn't become about one particular building or store experience, but actually how that brand will evolve over a period of time, allowing it to always be at the edge of brave, but still be true to its actual core values and still present the experience that their customers want to see, but always on that edge. I think that can be very interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. So we're fast approaching the end. So I just have one final question before we take a couple of questions. Given the title of our panel discussion today, could you give me one make and one break for a successful lighting scheme?
Can they be the same?
Sorry?
Can they be the same?
Yeah.
I was going to say lighting temperature. So, it will really make a scheme if you have consistent lighting temperature, if you've considered lighting temperature. Where you have, where it breaks a scheme is if you have, say, just to use downlights as an example, from different batches, there'll always be different temperatures, and it will always make the space look unconsidered. It'll maybe a little bit awkward. So those are the two, more the same for me.
Consistency.
So I think our break feature is always control, being able to control and layer lighting to actually feel like the experience that you had in your mind. And our make feature is always to create moments in a space, to use lighting to create moments.
I think for me, for the make, light source is important, not just the fixture. I'd compromise on the look of the fixture, but the quality of the light source is really important in making sure it's a consistent color throughout. And the break would be systems that aren't intuitive to use. It's great having the owners of the property know how to use this wonderful system, but when they have friends or family visit and they don't know what buttons to press and nothing's labeled correctly and nothing makes sense, then it's failed.
For us, the make, I think, is the intention of the light. So if it's a decorative light fitting, for example, what the intention is. So we've just done one in a void between two floors, and it's joining the two floors, but there's parts of this light fitting hanging down, over the two floors, and it really unifies the space, and that's exactly what the client wanted. Our break is definitely when you walk into any sort of place, and it's just the ceiling is covered with spots everywhere, which they're not really lighting very much. It's lighting the floor, whereas we always like to, if we incorporate into our lighting schemes, what are we actually lighting? So normally we're lighting the walls for art or whatever else, or whatever feature is being lit, or the task lighting, dining room. But when you walk into a space and someone's overlaid on top of all the decorative, well thought out lighting, just this grid of spots, that's my break.
I think my make and break is your make. You have to make sure that whichever fixture it is that you're choosing, whether it be a sconce or a chandelier, a table lamp, floor lamp, it's going to do what it's meant to be doing. Because there's nothing worse than having something quite exquisite and then you flick the switch and actually it's not lighting the area that it's supposed to be lighting, because it's an awful moment for everybody. Awful.
The number of times that I've been to see clients and, we're doing a refresh or something like that, and they've actually forgotten the controls that they've set up. So they've got little paper Post-its stuck on the walls. Yeah.
Love it. So thank you very much. Can we have some questions? Oh.
I've got a question about light bulbs, and it's two-sided, so it's aimed at you as a manufacturer. And at what point do you consider the actual light bulb that we would use? And then to the panel, how have they overcome the nightmare of constantly experimenting with light bulbs and finding the right warmth level and all that? It's just a total dementing nightmare.
And I feel your pain. It's one of the very, very first things that we think about. For the reason that I said, you have to think about what that particular fixture is supposed to be doing. There's the US hate LED. They don't understand LED. We've embraced it to the point where a lot of our sconces, we're starting to use LED panels. They're not something to be scared of in any way. You can get them in so many different colours. So they can be very, very consistent. What I would say is that they're. I don't think I can say it in this particular seminar. There's one particular brand out there who are very, very good, and the LED bulbs are very consistent. So we can talk afterwards. Come and find me if you want to know who they are, because that's the way that I would actually go.
I agree. It's a bit of a nightmare at the moment. As we're working. For example, we've got one client who has a halogen system. But now we're working on their new build, which they want to be all LED, but lots of the lights that we've specified for their old house, can we use them, can we not use them, remains to be seen. So I think I agree, it is a complete nightmare at the moment, because we're between these kind of the halogen system and the LED system, particularly if you're working with things like Lutron, and some of them won't talk to other parts. There is no there's no real answer to it. It's just a matter of trying to use LED where we can, because knowing that that's what's going to be coming through, because halogen lighting will probably, they are trying to phase it all out, so yeah. It's really difficult.
So with the LED bulbs, they're totally compatible with this particular brand, with regular switches, with dimmer switches, so it's not a problem. It's one of the questions that we're asked all the time. You buy your chandelier, you buy your floor lamp, table lamp, whatever. You just screw them in, you're good to go. So I don't believe that particular brand does G9, but there are other brands out there. We'll talk.
I think it's a great argument for why you get a lighting specialist involved. As an
Absolutely.
interior designer, you can't know everything about every product, every fixture, every fitting. They will be much more aware of what's available. They'll have brands pitching to them continuously. I take their advice, and
It's such a specialist field.
It's also really lends important to having the commissioning process, because inevitably you'll go through that whole process with a lighting consultant, and when it comes to actually commissioning, you might find that a driver actually needs to be changed because there's flickering at a certain range, or the bulbs have to be changed, the fittings have to be reconsidered. So I think it's keeping the conversation going all the way through until the point where it can be fully commissioned and handed over.
And I would say we're probably a couple of years out from having a level of consistency, but there are some brands out there where the LED bulbs are exceptional. They're very good. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.